So Gigabyte's enthusiast gamer brand Aorus has never skimped on hardware for their top-of-the-line laptops. The brand new Aorus X5 V7 is no exception. It brings an overclockable Intel Kaby Lake CPU, powerful NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1070 graphics, and even a high-resolution display to a sleek and compact chassis. While it doesn't qualify as an NVIDIA Max-Q laptop, the extra size that pushes it just above Max-Q spec has ensured an uncompromised gaming experience. For hardware, we're looking at a quad-core Intel Core i7 7820HK processor, and yes, this is a K-series processor, indicating the CPU can be overclocked. GTX 1070 graphics with 8GB of GDDR5 is paired with a high-resolution G-Sync display, either 2880 by 1620 or in the case of my review unit here, 4K. 16GB of RAM is standard, but again, Aorus kicked that up for their review unit here, 32GB you'll find inside. There's also an M.2 SSD and a hard drive. I mentioned the X5 V7 isn't a Max-Q laptop, but that doesn't mean it's outrageously large. In fact, as far as GTX 1070 laptops go, this machine is on the smaller side with a thickness of 22.9mm and a weight of 2.5 kilograms. It's a 15.6-inch unit too, so the overall footprint isn't massive, which makes it easy to carry around. Although keep in mind you'll need to carry around the 600-gram power brick if you want to make full use of the beastly hardware inside this laptop. The X5's cooling solution comprises of a lot of vents to provide enough airflow to the i7 7820HK and GTX 1070 inside, but perhaps not as many vents as appear at first glance. Fans at the top left and right corners draw in air through vents on the top and base of the laptop, which is then exhausted through the back and sides. The vent that surrounds the illuminated Aorus logo power button, as well as the side vents at the front of the laptop, are used for the multi-speaker setup. The magnesium chassis looks pretty nice, and I love the lid in particular with its illuminated Aorus logo. The X5 V7 is equipped with a fantastic array of ports. The left has HDMI 2.0, two USB 3.0 and an SD card reader. The right, mini DisplayPort 1.3, two 3.5mm audio jacks, Thunderbolt 3, there's a USB 3.1 Type-C port there, and the back, well, you see a power port, Ethernet and two more USB 3.0 ports. As a minor complaint, it's hard to tell the difference between the Thunderbolt 3 and USB 3.1 Type-C ports without looking at the tiny logos printed next to them. They're both USB Type-C, so they pretty much look identical. The keyboard used on the X5 V7 is Gigabyte's new laptop design I first saw on the Aero 15. Its travel distance is good for a gaming laptop with a nice clicky response to the rubber dome keycaps. The amount of force required to activate each key makes it a great option for both typing and gaming. And the layout is respectable as well, especially the large sizes for the left modifier keys, and the inclusion of both a numpad and macro keys is a welcome inclusion. Aorus includes full RGB backlighting here with the ability to individually customize the color of every key. You can achieve awesome effects through the Fusion utility, and you can also create profiles for each game that illuminate just the keys required for the game. The utility and customizability isn't as well featured as Razer's competing offering, though it's nice to see another laptop with full RGB keyboard lighting. The trackpad, well, it's a garbage ELAN unit, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it because, especially at high resolutions, its tracking performance is pretty poor. You need to use a mouse with this laptop. On the other hand, the display is one of the best aspects to the X5 V7. Most gaming laptops opt to use boring 1080p displays, which often don't get the most out of the hardware inside them. The X5 V7 comes in two display options, and neither are 1080p. You can get a WQHD Plus display or a UHD display, both with G-Sync and both with IPS technology. My review unit was the UHD 4K model, so it's no surprise to discover that it has just a maximum refresh rate of 60Hz, but G-Sync here is still hugely important for a smooth gaming experience. Like the Gigabyte Aero 15, the Aorus X5 V7 is X-Rite Pantone certified, which means the laptop comes with an sRGB accurate display profile that can be toggled in the command and control utility. Most gaming laptops are poor in terms of their display accuracy, but thanks to the X-Rite Pantone profile, the X5 V7 is actually quite decent in this regard. Not as good as the Aero 15, but below a delta U value of 2.0 across our color tests, and with an average color temperature that's near accurate. Color calibration comes at the expense of brightness. The X5V7 is only capable of 265 nits of brightness, and the IPS contrast ratio of 1041 to 1 is only okay. But for those that require a fully calibrated display, I was able to achieve fantastic results with SpectraCal CamMount 5, pushing a Delta E average of below 0.7 across the board. That's dead accurate as far as I'm concerned. The Aorus X5V7 includes slightly different hardware than what we usually see in gaming laptops. Most gaming machines opt for Intel's Core i7-7700HQ. That's a locked quad-core 8-thread processor with a base clock of 2.8 GHz that boosts up to 3.8 GHz. The X5V7 though uses a higher-end Kaby Lake quad-core, the Core i7-7820HK, which by default is clocked at 2.9 GHz and boosts up to 3.9 GHz. Now normally, 100 MHz clock speed increase, it's not anything to get excited about, but the i7-7820HK is a K-series processor, so it can be overclocked. And out of the box, the Aorus X5V7 makes use of this capability, pushing the clock speed up to 4.2 GHz for single core workloads and 3.8 GHz for all core workloads. Sometimes I observe those all core clock speeds dip to 3.6 GHz during sustained usage, but still, 100 to 300 MHz overclock, which is nothing to sneeze at in the laptop form factor. The GPU, well, NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1070 with 8GB of GDDR5. As has always been the case, the laptop GTX 1070 slightly different to the desktop part with more CUDA cores and a lower peak rated clock speed. The performance though of both chips is pretty much the same. My review unit was kitted out with 32GB of G.Skill Ripjaw's DDR4 2400, although I believe 16GB is the norm for this laptop. Inside are two M.2 slots, although only one is occupied, in this case with a Toshiba THNSN 5256 GPU7 SSD. Not a mouthful at all, but that is a 256GB NVMe PCIe SSD. And you can install more than just 3 games in it because there's also a 1TB 7200 RPM hard drive from HGST. As you'd expect, system performance is a bit higher than what I've seen in the past from gaming laptops that pack that 7700 HQ. The clock speed differences of up to 400 MHz do lead to better performance in some situations, particularly rendering workloads like Cinebench and the X264 benchmark. Here the CPU can be up to 20% faster, which is a decent margin that does help when it comes to games. Storage performance is also decent, though nothing hugely outstanding, as most gaming laptops these days include fast M.2 drives with sequential performance above 1GB per second. A larger drive would be nice, though as I mentioned before, there's a spare M.2 slot inside for upgradability. There's two questions to answer when it comes to the graphics performance of the X5V7. We know the GTX 1070 is a highly capable GPU at 1080p, but does the extra CPU power of the i7-7820HK improve performance significantly compared to more typical i7-7700HQ laptops? And secondly, is the GTX 1070 with this CPU good enough for mobile gaming at 4K? After all, there's a 4K display in this laptop, so if the GPU is capable, I'm sure you'll want to use that functionality. So let's answer the first question to begin with. Across a range of more recent games, the extra CPU power no doubt has a significant impact on gaming performance. Looking at GTA 5, we can see an uplift in both average and minimum frame rates over the Asus ROG GL502VS, which is a GTX 1070 laptop equipped with a weaker i7-7700HQ CPU. With the 1% low now pushing above 60 FPS, it's an ideal experience here at max settings with 4x MSAA. Rise of the Tomb Raider goes from unplayable to playable at maximum settings thanks to the faster CPU, which pushes minimum frame rates above 30 FPS. Now, you probably wouldn't want to play at those settings when turning off SSAA drastically improves performance, but it's good to note in any case. Deus Ex Mankind Divided isn't massively impacted by the faster CPU, though performance is marginally better in both average and minimum frame rates. It's a pretty GPU limited game, so there's no surprise here. Hitman gets a big bump in average frame rate and a boost to minimums, now pushing above 60 FPS 99% of the time. Hitman is pretty CPU intensive, so it's no surprise to see the faster 7820HK delivering a good speed bump in this game. Civilization 6 is another CPU limited game that benefits significantly from the CPU speed bump in the Aorus X5V7. The game is very playable on an i7-7700HQ, considering the built-in benchmark is a bit of a stress test, but more frames on average and at minimum is always nice thanks to the faster CPU here. Watch Dogs 2, again, more performance from the Aorus X5 V7 in what is a demanding game on the CPU. It's nice to see the GTX 1070 being capable of 1080p ultra detail settings, and those extra few frames certainly help. The last game I'll be looking at here is Mass Effect Andromeda inside the surprisingly demanding Tempest. I don't have any comparison data from the GL502 VS, but it's nice to see much better performance than GTX 1070 laptops in any case. When you're out and about on planets, expect much better performance than these numbers show. So as far as gaming at 4K is concerned, the GTX 1070 isn't powerful enough for me to comfortably say 4K gaming is possible in every game. There are certainly some times where the Aorus X5 V7 can push decent frame rates at 4K, but the most intensive games in my test suite were simply too much for the GPU at decent quality levels. As you can see from the table, only Hitman and Civilization 6 were playable at 4K ultra quality with minimum frame rates above 30 FPS. The Aorus X5 V7 has a G-Sync display, so the experience with these sort of performance levels is decent, although I suspect some people probably want a little bit better nonetheless. In other titles, you need to play around with reduced quality settings to hit playable performance at 4K. The good news is that for the most part, you don't need to reduce quality levels too far to hit a minimum frame rate above 30 FPS. Some games were very playable on high details at 4K, while others required dipping down to medium details instead. But the great thing about having a 4K display on a laptop like this is you can choose between high resolution gaming and high performance gaming depending on the game and your preferences. If you prefer ultra quality and 60 FPS, you can play at 1080p without much hassle, but if you want a native 4K experience or you're playing at a game where, the GTX 1070 has no trouble at 4K, you will have the ability to push up the resolution for much sharper gameplay. The main downside to the Aorus X5 V7's performance are the noise levels from the cooling solution. This laptop isn't quiet, especially under load, and it has a tendency to run its fans at an audible level even when the workload is light. Headphones are a must for gaming. Temperatures are reasonable, though not fantastic. After 30 minutes of gaming in Watch Dogs 2, the CPU was sitting at a toasty 88 degrees Celsius from approximately 70% usage, while the GPU sat at 85 degrees. There is some thermal headroom as far as the fans are concerned, because they can spin up a bit higher than they were under this test, though it's clear Aorus has designed the laptop for the factory overclock they've gone with. It's also worth mentioning that some areas of the laptop's chassis can get pretty hot. The WAS and D keys get a bit hotter than I'd usually like, and the upper parts of the magnesium body probably shouldn't be touched during lengthy usage. But if you want a premium gaming experience, there's no doubt in my mind that you'll get it with the Aorus X5 V7. The collection of top-end hardware, particularly the overclockable i7-7820HK and high-resolution G-Sync display, delivers a notably better gaming experience over more basic GTX 1070 laptops with the Core i7-7700HQ inside. To get the Aorus X5 V7's premium GTX 1070 gaming experience, you'll need to pay a hefty premium though. GTX 1070 laptops tend to start around the $1,500 to $1,700 US mark, but the entry-level X5 V7 costs a whopping $2,400. Of course, you're getting much better hardware in every regard, though some will find it hard to, swallow a $900 margin. We're not quite hitting GTX 1080 laptop pricing, but this laptop does come pretty close. Anyway, that's it for this look at the X5 V7. If you're interested in this laptop, you can check its current prices in the description below. Also, definitely head over to TechSpot and take a look at the written review, because I covered a few things in there that I didn't discuss in this video for time reasons. Overclocking the CPU and GPU is one of those things. Anyway, that's it for now, and I'll catch you in the next one.